You're listening to Tonebenders, the Sound Designers Podcast. Let's do this.
Hello and welcome to Tonebenders. My name is Tim Muirhead and I will be your host for today. I'm really excited for the conversation we're about to have because it's about the runaway smash hit miniseries on Netflix, The Queen's Gambit. I know you've all seen it because everyone has seen this show. It's amazing. It's super stylized, takes place in the Cold War, and is about the chess scene at the time. Now, yesterday we talked to Eric Hoehn, who did the final mixing, and he was super interesting to talk to. That is episode 150A. This is episode 150B, and today we're going to talk to the sound editorial crew and the Foley artists that worked on it. So without further ado, let's introduce our guests. Joining us today is series sound supervisor Gregg Swiatlowski. You've heard Gregg's work on previous projects like Billions, this year's great movie, The 40-Year-Old Version, I loved that movie, and the previous series by the creators of Queen's Gambit, the criminally underrated Godless. Gregg, you have a lot of credits on your IMDb as a dialogue editor and dialogue supervisor. What made you make the jump from that to being the sound supervisor overall?
I always liked doing dialogue. That's what I, found myself most comfortable doing on projects. In terms of being a supervisor and just making sure that the show is moving forward as planned, that is kind of in my nature, I guess. So that's what guided me to doing sound supervision.
Also with us is Eric Hirsch. Eric was a sound editor and re-recording mixer on Queen's Gambit. His previous credits include Juliet Naked, Tales of the City, and Divorce. Eric, welcome to Tonebenders. It looks like Gregg and yourself have a lot of overlapping credits on IMDb. How did you two first meet?
We first met working on the film...
Nice Guy Johnny.
Thank you. Nice Guy Johnny, Ed Burns' film, back in 2012, something like that. We were both sort of like the young kids who were given a shot at like doing the whole thing ourselves, kind of. So he was the supervisor and I was the mixer. And we did that, sort of muddled through it, and then just worked well together. We're sort of around the same age and have similar aesthetics and I think similar kind of studio vibes. So it was, we work well together. I was trying to look on IMDb to see how many projects we've done together. It's at least 10 or something like that, right, Gregg?
Yeah. A number.
See, that proves that you do get along well together, because if you know the exact number, that means you haven't enjoyed it. It's like, oh, it's been 8.
Yeah.
So also joining us today is Rachel Chauncey. She's responsible for all the Foley in Queen's Gambit. Her previous projects she's worked on include I, Tonya, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Sword of Destiny, and the series Warrior. Rachel, welcome to the show. In a couple sentences, can you tell us how you got into Foley?
I got into Foley because I have a theater background and I leaned towards sound when I started studying or interning and assisting in post-production. And it's very detailed work that a lot of people don't really want to do. And I just happen to have the patience for it, I guess. That drew me to it.
I loved the Foley in the show. We're going to start talking about that soon.
Thank you.
But finally, we have our returning champion, Leo Marcil. Leo was previously on Tonebenders to talk about his work on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood in our episode 111. Leo's previous work includes Hunters, Deepwater Horizon, and Godless, which we mentioned earlier. Leo, you're based in California, while everyone else on this talk is New York City area based. Can you tell me how this production managed its bi-coastal teams? How did you guys all work together as a team?
We're in touch with each other every day. With the time differences, we kind of found a rhythm, and Gregg was on top of pretty much hurdling everything on that side and getting stuff over to us, and it was really a team effort of a mix.
Gregg, I wonder if you could expand on the idea that for this project, you followed Wiley Stateman's ABCs, which is always be cutting, and by extension, always be mixing, the rapid prototyping, the always be evolving the soundtrack from the very, very beginning you step onto it. I was wondering if you could kind of elaborate on everybody's role within that philosophy.
Basically, Eric and I were teaming up to just get as much sound into the film as possible at the beginning. So it's kind of like doing a feature film with, 3 temps, basically. Like your first temp, you just try to power through everything, get as much final sound as you can into the project, and then do a temp mix on it, and then move forward from there. At the beginning, it was kind of a smaller crew. It was me and Eric, and we had 2 effects editors, James Redding and Pat Cicero, that helped us out at the first temp. That was all pre-pandemic, so it was sort of like just a regular project in terms of like how you manage to get files to and from people, because Eric and I were both at the same studio. Actually, Eric, you were in the cutting room.
Sure, I was working in light iron with the picture department. So basically it was the picture department, then down the hall was the music editor, and next to the music editor was me, and I had basically like a little mini mix stage, which is the model that Wiley and Eric Hoehn pioneered on Godless, which is something that works really well for the picture department because they can be working with actual tracks as opposed to slugging in their own sort of like crummy temp, picture department sound effects. They're actually working with what's going to be in the final mix. And it's good for us too because we don't have to just cram everything in at the end. We could sort of, be layering it in and, start working on things from the beginning and start building a library of sounds that are going to make it in eventually. So Gregg was working at Goldcrest, so we would just be working together, sending files in the same way you would sort of anywhere with two facilities.
So how did the West Coast arm of this operation come into play?
It's really Wiley. Wiley is, has the very strong relationship with Scott, the showrunner, and Wiley is, the sound designer on the project.
This is Wiley's Statement. I don't think we've said his last name yet. So Wiley's Statement, yes.
Do we need to say his last name?
Yeah, exactly. He's got 9 Oscar nominations or something like that. We all know who he is. So yes.
Yeah. I've had a relationship with Wiley for a number of years, going back to a film called Run All Night that we had worked on together. And then I'd also done Godless. So then I was also involved with Queen's Gambit. It was always sort of like, it was more about the people on the film rather than where they were sitting. So I think as we move forward, that just became more and more true.
Well, I think it became more and more true for the entire world because when you started on this, it was pre-pandemic, and then you had to transition. Rachel, you work out of your house, kind of, right? So the pandemic almost didn't make a difference to you, maybe.
No, it actually made no difference at all. I remember when Eric emailed me, we were sort of discussing the schedule and like doing a few weeks of work here and a few weeks of work there. And I remember thinking, well, the only reason I could not possibly work up in a particular week was I was going to Jazz Fest, and that's my week I can't work. And then, of course, we got locked down in mid-March, so I was trapped at home anyway. So it was very easy to schedule because it's just me and it's all in my house.
So you do Foley in an interesting way. Can you tell us your Foley process?
In terms of physically where I work in my basement, which is below grade, and the first floor of my brownstone, and I live upstairs in the 2 floors above that. So I just head down there depending on if I'm doing wood floors and furniture and things like that. I work on the ground floor, which has wood and tile and a kitchen and a bathroom and doors. And if I'm doing really quiet stuff, Russell, or say the chess pieces, I do most of my props down in the basement.
And are you recording yourself at the same time?
I am, yeah. I basically have both floors wired with separate interfaces and speakers and television monitors, and I hit the keyboard, I run into place, I do the thing, I go back, and then I edit right then and there, typically.
Yeah, it's always fun listening to Rachel's Foley because you can hear the space bar and then feet walking towards the mic. So you always have a good perspective on feet on all of her recordings.
That is true. And yeah, I mean, I do it right then and there. So I don't have a lot of waste, I think, in my tracks. It's like if I determine whether or not I have what I need, I often edit it right into place and then I move on. I can keep it pretty tight working this way.
So Leo, when did you come in on this project? Because I believe when we talked to you about Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, you played the role that Eric is playing in this project by being kind of immersed with the picture crew.
Yeah, that one I was in really early. On this one, it was Eric Hirsch and Gregg playing that role. I came in after they've made a pass of the episodes to start focusing on really story point design, making a thicker soundtrack, some of the visual effects that were coming in and finishing. That was one of my main focuses because that was the one thing that never really finished until the very end, was the visual effects kept updating and kept changing. Sometimes chess pieces on the ceiling where cement would be one size, and next time they were wooden and be doing different movements, so those could continually change. And just to create something to read through the mix that would be fun for the film was my biggest role.
Well, that's a good segue. So we've kind of talked about everybody's role on the show. Let's talk about the actual sound work that you did now. The series starts off with kind of a dour visual style in the kids' school. Everything's kind of muted colors. And as the series goes on, by the end, there's fantastic wardrobe, very brightly designed rooms. Did you approach the sound design in the same way?
For sure. I think the great part about doing this series is every episode is sort of like its own unique space. It was very easy to evolve the track with it because you're in basically a different location or a different, city or something throughout the whole series. The styles can change a bit between episodes and build with it. We did try to have a focus on certain sounds and certain elements that would become signature to the series that we definitely did a lot of work to change the sound per episode, but at the same time make it seem seamless throughout the whole series.
One of the things that was kind of interesting about the series is that the first episode was like 2.5 hours. It was like its own enormous thing. So it almost occupied a sort of disproportionate share of like the whole series for a little while. So there was like the Methuen experience and then there was everything else, So Methuen took a while to sort of like...
That's the name of the school that she was in.
Right, exactly. The orphanage that she was in. So that had its own sort of like challenges and trying to keep that alive and bringing in little girls to do loop group for the orphans in the background. And then it's just sort of stylistically totally different from everything else. And, once you get into the other episodes, then you're in the world. There are places other than large, echoey rooms filled with sad girls. There's like more things. So...
As the locations change throughout the whole series, you can, build upon that. And obviously, like a big Russian theater hall with people and very serious chess tournament is going to just sound more thrilling than an orphanage in Lexington, Kentucky.
Obviously, the series is based around the game of chess, which to those who aren't regular players, that's not the most exciting sounding topic. But these games of chess in the show, it's super tension-filled, and a lot of that is left to you guys because the imagery is just pieces moving around on a chessboard. Do you want to talk about how scared you were when you realized how much was going to be on you?
We had a lot of good production sounds of chess, just like the playing, which was sort of what was in the show for the majority of the process. And we did a final Foley pass on all of the Foley, basically every one of the sequences. And it was just, very eye-opening on how much life that brought to all the games.
We should probably also spare a moment here for Carlos Rafael Rivera, the composer, where he would just say he was faced with the enormity of his task because, the sounds that we brought were great and everything, but with no music, there's only so much drama that you can bring to it. So he really had to do a lot of like the sort of emotional heavy lifting, and then that allowed us to sort of skate on the surface of the sound, like... Had we not had his foundation there, it would have been a much longer and slower series than it is.
Rachel, how did you approach doing the chess Foley?
I was very lucky in that I was able to get the prompts and the clocks and the boards and the chess pieces. And I did several passes depending on what I was looking for. It's just like doing a sword fight, but instead of using weapons, you use pawns and knights and rooks. And I did a first pass, which was ups and downs, the big moves. And then I did more subtle passes, which is, chess pieces clinking up or clanking up against each other when they, you take someone's piece. And then I did a final, very subtle pass of the movement of the pieces on the board. It was a lot of fun to do. I mean, the cinematography in it is so beautiful that you just want to add these little sounds to really emphasize the tension of the game and the beauty, I mean, chess pieces are absolutely gorgeous. The boards are gorgeous. The clocks are gorgeous. And adding that element, was a lot of fun.
It was really cool. I'm not sure how much Eric and Leo had to do with this as part of the mixing crew, but how those little sounds punched through in the final mix really was a stroke of genius. You noticed it, but in a way that was completely realistic. It didn't feel like it was too loud, but it was too loud. Like, chess pieces don't actually make much noise, but it seemed just like that's the way this world should be.
Everyone talks about the chess, but honestly, the pills and the booze were a lot of fun too.
Do you want to elaborate on that?
No.
Rachel's a method Foley artist, so
Yeah,
let's not go too far into this.
Tanked every day.
I had a great time during quarantine. This sense that Beth was this little girl almost through the whole thing, like this doll of a person, and all of the props, like the huge thing of pills at the school, were like massive. And it was just a lot of fun to look at, and a lot of fun to do. And, I love the capsule effects and the cocktails that run through the whole film. It's just a lot of fun.
What did you use for the giant pill bottle?
I have a huge mason jar, like the biggest mason jar. So I kind of went realistically with that. And I save all of the medication that I have that expires and all of the Advils and the whatevers, So I hoard all of that and use it when necessary.
Well, that's handy. I don't have enough Advil in my house to fill up a jar that big, I'll tell you that much. The other moment I wanted to talk about the sound design for, the main character sometimes has these drugged out hallucinations where chess pieces appear magically on the ceiling and she visualizes games. And there's some cool sound design going on with that.
The visual effects went through a lot of versions. So I had a lot of different goes at it. And I kind of started to merge different attempts together to make one version. It was a lot of fun to do. A lot of organic sounds to make them. A lot of Pro Sub harmonic plug-in saturators and reverbs. It was like painting a picture for each one. Each one was different and all had some pieces from the other one to pull together and be reminiscent of her past. Michelle, the editor, she would send a clip. She's like, I don't know how this is going to work. And then we'd do a pass of sound and send it to her. And she's like, this is great, but can you do this and this and this? And it'd be 2 or 3, 4 or 5 rounds. And she's really particular and she has great notes. And we'd find it. And then Scott would see it and hear it. And he would have a note. And so it'd go through a couple of people and eventually it'd stick in there. And when we find kind of the taste they like, we continue to keep it in a similar realm as she goes forward and continue to hallucinate.
In a normal sports movie, and really this is kind of a sports movie, well, not movie, TV series, when a big move happens, the crowd goes wild. But in chess, the crowd has to stay muted. But still, you've made the crowd present, which is quite a trick. How did you go about doing that? And how much of that was loop group? How much was from library? How did you make that magic happen?
The majority of the crowds in the chess tournaments were all group. They were all very particular reactions. We kind of dealt with that same sort of thing while we were on the stage for the first couple of episodes. How do we keep the audience alive, but also like nobody talks during chess, and you would get shunned if you talked during a chess match. So
it's actually a plot point. The first time she goes into one of those, she starts talking, gets shushed right down. So there's no hiding in there. It's a plot point in the movie that the crowd has to be quiet, but then the crowd can't be quiet.
Pretend like you're in a courtroom or pretend like you're in a library, but we still need to hear you, so do it a little bit louder than you would. And, most group actors come from a theater background anyways, so they're all about the theater whisper. That's mainly how we kept all those rooms alive. The louder applauses or something at the end, we could rely on some sound effects tracks and such like that.
It was also kind of a challenge for the group casting. So it was Dan Fink and Bruce Winnant, and they had to find, because it goes over multiple countries and a few continents, so we had to try and find the kind of reactions in the proper languages, even when it's not something that you're not really supposed to be like clocking consciously. So that was a challenge for them.
There's a big match in Mexico City, a big match in Paris, a big match in Moscow. So yeah, those crowds all had to sound completely different.
In a way, it's sort of thankful that the pandemic happened for this particular situation because, normally it's like if you're doing loop group in New York, you're hiring New York loop group actors or, like maybe one person from California will come out. But when we kind of switched to everybody had to do this from home, it sort of opened up the casting pool in a way that we could get like an actual Russian-speaking actor that knew English to do the Russian loop group. It made that process like a lot more hyper-focused on what kind of language and what kind of accent do we want or need.
How do you do loop group in a lockdown? Like, did you just record everybody individually, or?
That was like my biggest fear from the beginning of everybody working from home. We had managed to get the first 4 episodes recorded just like the beginning of March, luckily. And then the rest of the time was spent like, let's wait on loop group. Let's see if like maybe next month it'll be a little better. Maybe next month it'll be a little better. And I kept pushing the producers to just hold off on loop group for as long as possible. But we sort of hit the point where it was coming up on July. We knew that's when we were doing our final mix. So it's like, okay, we got to pull the trigger with this. And thankfully at that time, some options had opened up that weren't as ridiculous as everybody recording locally, sending me files, me putting back together a puzzle piece. I guess it was sort of similar to the way we're doing this podcast where, everybody's remote at home. Everybody, was required to get a decent caliber microphone. It was like a Zoom session that we used this program called Clean Feed. So all of the audio went from each actor cleanly to our remote engineer, who then combined everybody and recorded it in a Pro Tools session. So everything could then come to me, like time-stamped in the right spot in relatively decent sync, because they were also able to send the picture to each of the actors in the Zoom call. That's mainly how we did it. What we would just try to do is, rather than having 8 open mics at any one time, it's like the actors that were not doing a cue would be in mute, and you would only unmute yourself if you were doing a cue.
Well, you must have been very thankful for those big reverberant rooms when mixing that, so you could just wash that all out in reverb.
I actually got kind of aggressive with it, where I was telling people, like, no, this is great. Like, you shouldn't be close to your microphone. Like, you're standing over there when you're acting. Like, why would, so it actually made those big rooms sound bigger because we had these variable kind of sounding rooms. And then it was sort of nice when if you did like 2 or 3 people at one time and everybody was somewhat different, like different spaced around their microphones. When it all got recorded, it just sounded like 3 different people in 3 different parts of a room, which actually is more realistic to what it would sound like if you were standing in a room.
This series was broken up into 6, 7 episodes,
7.
But it really feels kind of like one massive project. Did you tackle it in episode format?
I don't know how Gregg and Eric worked, but I know that I did the first 3 episodes together, and then I think the next 2, and then the final 2. At some point when I started, it was 6, and then it got changed to 7. It got rebalanced into 7. And that's how I delivered them until, like, towards the end of the whole process. I started sort of delivering M&E Foley, for just missing things here and there. And then I delivered them, I think, by episode. But the first 2 or 3 pushes of Foley work were done in thirds, I would say, of the whole series.
Basically, we had the whole thing shot at once, and so it was kind of like working on a big movie, but it was broken into episodes. At some point, they decided that there was this sort of big, massive restructuring where they went from 6 episodes to 7, which didn't affect the first episode and didn't affect the last episode, but everything in between got kind of like mixed around. But we tried to take it in batches also because we knew that we were going to be working for such a long time on it. But so we wanted to get some stuff into the show as soon as possible, but wanted to leave ourselves more recording time to get the stuff that was going to be like the real detail and the real fine stuff. So I would just sort of say, like, here's, I would ask for, like, we need this for these 3 episodes to get this to a point where we can have a mix that's okay, like a good temp mix for them to cut to. A lot of it was just sort of like getting them a soundtrack that they could use to gauge how the cut was working for a long time, so they would, both Scott and Michelle Tesoro are just sort of unable to look at a cut that doesn't have the right sound. They can't say, well, okay, when the sound is right, this will probably work. They just have to have a more fully realized version of the sound in order to say, okay, yeah, the pacing is good. This works. These beats work. So it's kind of just like layers in a way.
And to that point, they see this as a big picture. So it's not just, 7 episodes, it's one series. So that was sort of the whole reason behind the process of us being on from the beginning. Is it's basically like it's a large feature film, and they work on it in temp mixes, and they want everything in it, as much as you can at all times. And then if something from the beginning of episode 4 makes more sense in the beginning of episode 2, they can switch it. So it's almost like each episode is its own reel. It would get even more complicated than that, because then they would break each episode up into 4 reels. Right. So then you're working in 4 reels in one episode, and then, reel 2 of episode 4 goes to, episode 6. It gets like, it can kind of be passed around like that. But I think that's all in service of the big picture, which is, the end result.
Well, thank you very much for joining me, everybody. It was really great talking to you. I don't think I mentioned it in the intro, but when I watched the first episode, when it came out, I wasn't really sure what I was getting into. and then I just kept hitting start on the next episode, and then it's 3:30 in the morning. I got to get up with the kids, and you guys ruined a week of my life basically with this show because I didn't sleep. And thank you very much for that. I was entertained but very tired during the day. So thank you for joining me, and hopefully we'll talk again sometime. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank you.
Great, it was a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Great, thanks, Tim.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Hey there, if you're looking for more hot Queen's Gambit audio talk, make sure you check out our episode 150A where we talk to Eric Hoehn about the mixing of Queen's Gambit. He's an excellent storyteller and has some cool tips for mixing dialogue, so make sure you check that out. Not only are these Queen's Gambit episodes our 150th episodes, but they are also our first episodes released under the banner of the Audio Podcast Alliance. If you're a fan of Tonebenders, I think you'll be a fan of a lot of these other podcasts. They all deal with working in sound professionally. There's the Location Sound podcast, Sound Bites podcast, the Soundworks collection, the Sound Effect podcast, and many more. So occasionally you'll be hearing little rundowns at the end of our episodes of what's going on in these other podcasts. So if you take a listen and hear something that you think would be interesting, head over and listen to that podcast too, and maybe you'll be entertained and maybe even learn a little something. So thanks for listening today. Have a great time. We got some more amazing episodes coming your way, so stay tuned.
Tonebenders is produced by Timothy Muirhead, Renee Coronado, and Teresa Morrow. Theme music is by Mark Strait. Send your emails to info@tonebenderspodcast.com. Follow us on Twitter via @thetonebenders and join Tonebenders Podcast on Facebook. Support this podcast. You can use our links when you shop at Amazon or B&H, or leave us a tip. Just go to tonebenderspodcast.com and click the support button. Thanks for listening.
Hi, this is Sam from The Sound Architect. In our recent episodes, I've spoken to composer Patrick Kierst about his recent work on The Kissing Booth 1 and 2, and coming very soon I'll share interviews with voice actor Jane Perry about her career as well as her role in Cyberpunk 2077, composers Mikolaj Straczynski and Gary Scheinman about their soundtrack for Metamorphosis, and composer Chris Velasco about his soundtrack for Carrion. Find us at www.thesoundarchitect.co.uk.
Hey, this is Christian from a Sound Effect podcast. In our latest episode, you will hear about designing sound for Netflix series The Crown and composing music for The Haunting of Bly Manor. Check it out at soundeffect.com/podcast.